Welcome back, everyone. Here we are once again, working on Pwn Adventure 3. And what I'm going to be talking about in this video is our dissection of the game protocol here. Over the past few days, I have been working my way towards an asynchronous proxy, a TCP proxy that we can use to inject packets and manipulate the game, the communication between the server and the client. But to be clear, that is in no way necessary to complete any of the objectives in this game. It certainly is interesting, and that's what I'm pursuing. But the only things you really need to complete the objectives here is your trainer, or just using Cheat Engine, and then a dissector, so that you can view packets as they fly back and forth. You don't actually need to manipulate them. So while it is sort of a stretch goal for me to build a TCP proxy, what I'm going to show you today is really all you need in order to complete the course and all of the objectives in the game. And I'm actually going to show you two ways that you can do this. One of them using Wireshark here with a LUA script that acts as a dissector. And the other way with Python, writing our own sniffer and then parsing the packets, essentially creating our own dissector. Before we get to all of that, let me first explain what the game protocol is and how it works. So here, what you see is Wireshark. This is traffic that I captured when I was playing the game. This is me logging in and then walking around, shooting some fireballs, just kind of checking to see what's going on. At one point, I wander over to the area where the bears spawn, and so I noticed that there's some unique packets that seem to show up whenever the bears are spawned in, and so on and so forth. And as I noticed, these packets, the game protocol seems to essentially be a data stream that updates either the server or the client using fixed known strings and just interprets it as just basic data about the game. So essentially, each of these packets here, let me hover right here will do, I suppose. So here, for example, we have these 6D76. That's the beginning of these packets. Turns out 6D76 corresponds in ASCII to MV, and this is indeed a position packet. So a move packet, if you will. What a dissector does is takes this data stream and parses it out and essentially interprets it not necessarily in the same way that the server would, because we don't know that, but in a way at least that we can understand and surmise that which values the server is most likely looking at for certain things that are going on, right? So let's start with a movement packet, because there are tons of them. If you're just capturing packets from the game, there's going to be an update position packet every tick, whether you're actually moving or not, all right? And then once we dissect the packet, then I will show you how we can parse that in both Wireshark and Python. What you see here first at the top is a movement packet. And what I noticed from basically watching the stream in Wireshark as I was walking around is there are several areas, discrete areas, that change depending on what I'm doing, right? The 6D76 never changes. So a movement packet is always a movement packet. It always starts with that. That's a good thing. That means that we can easily identify move packets. The next one, I should say the next three, they move when my character object moves, my player object. So one of them is definitely the x-axis. One of them is definitely the y-axis. And this last value changes when I move, but only if I'm moving on an incline or a decline. So I went out to the ocean, which is of course perfectly flat in the game, but you can walk on it, which means that if I move left and right or back and forward, the z value does not change. It's completely flat. The z value, if I'm standing in that location, If I move around, it doesn't change, but if I jump, it does. And when I go back to the land and I begin to walk up an incline where the land happens to be, then it changes. So one of these values is X, one of them is Y, the last one is Z. These last values here, they seem to correspond with the camera position. So not the character, not the actor position. My character object remains still, but I move the mouse, so I'm looking in different directions. That seems to change this value. These last 0 bytes here, they seem to change depending on whether or not I'm providing input. So if I'm moving forward or backward or left and right, these values will change to either 8-1 or 7F, and where those values appear in that string of zeros depends on whether or not I'm moving forward, backward, left, or right. So these are values that basically correspond to whether or not I am pushing WASD, which is one of the things that we wanted to find in the beginning when we were starting our speed hack. We no longer need to do that, but it's good to know that those values actually are there. And it turns out that there is a special value for when we push shift, which we'll get to in just a moment. So these 22 bytes here. Well, first, of course, it's 22 bytes because here we have 4. Here we have 8, 8, 8, 8, and 8. So 8 times 5 is 40, plus 4 is 44, but these are byte pairs. So 2 of them equals a byte, so each of these is 4 bits. So half of 44, 22. So a movement packet is always 22 bytes long, no matter where it appears. This is always the case. And through capturing a couple of other packets and taking a closer look at them, I noticed that these movement packets are actually embedded in other data streams. So for example, when I killed a creature and picked up some loot, the packet began with 6565 and then the rest of this. And then after these trailing zeros here, I noticed that there was a 6D76, and indeed that's 22 bytes long. So this tells me one important thing. The game protocol isn't just sending one stream per package. It will actually bundle data and concatenate it all together, right? So it scans through for certain values of certain lengths, and then it can continue reading in order to find the next important packet. It's also possible that the server may be doing some form of validation here because the server, of course, knows where that object, this pickup, knows where it's spawned, and it may be doing some validation to make sure that the position of the object is within activation distance of the position packet that is sent along with it, so the player is near the object. That's one way that maybe we can we might have to keep in mind later on if we want to do auto pickups or complete quest objectives, if there's like a collection objective or something like that, is that we may need to also send the packet a position that says that we're nearby in order to collect it remotely. And these position packets, they are present in the pickup packet. Here is a packet, excuse me, for when I shoot the fireball, right? Starts with 2A69. This is the Great Balls of Fire spell, and there's a position packet appended to the end of that as well. When we jump, the packet begins with 6A700 or 6A7001, and then there's a position packet. The 6A000, this seems to be when you're on the downswing, or perhaps when you take your finger off space. The 1 seems to be when you jump, and then you're holding down the space bar. Because, of course, as we learned when we did our jump hack, the jumping doesn't necessarily cause you to jump to your maximum height every time. Essentially, when you press space, you will accelerate upwards and for a fixed amount until eventually the jump stops, it reaches its apex, and then you automatically begin to descend until you reach another object that you can collide with. But you don't have to jump the maximum amount. You can do small jumps if you just tap space. So, of course, we have to send a signal that says we've tapped it, or I should say it's pressed and then it's not pressed, so that we can accurately calculate the height of that jump, or the game can accurately calculate the height of the jump. But in this case, what's interesting about this is that there's no reason for the server to need to know that. The server doesn't need to know how long we've pressed space. The client is what's handling that. The position packet makes sense, right? The server needs to know that we're up in the sky, right? If it's keeping track of our position, it needs to know that at least, but it doesn't need to know how long space has been held. And a packet like this that actually does show whether or not a button has been depressed and continues to go on is sometimes done in games as a anti-hacking measure because it can help to detect fly hacks. So if I have to hold down space to fly, if the server knows that I've been flying for, well, let's say that space has been held down for an excessive period of time and my z-axis continues to change, so it's not just like a broken button or something, then it's indicative of a fly hack and you can disconnect that player. I don't think that that's the case with Point Adventure 3. It's possible. And I don't think I'm going to get a chance to find out here this semester, but maybe it might do that, I suppose. Also note here that in this position packet for jumping, note that the last null bytes here for our position packet, we see the 7F feature, and that is because I am not just jumping, but I'm jumping forward, so I'm holding down W and jumping, so we can see that's what it looks like when you're actually moving. As I mentioned, there is a signal for when we are holding down the shift key. This is a packet that begins with 726E01. It's an RN package or a run package, and then we have a position packet appended to that. I don't know why the server needs to know that we are pressing shift, unless it's part of some position validation that's being done. But this does show that there is some code that does identify that, right? That we've pressed shift. So we could probably have done a bin patch so that when shift is depressed, it does something, but we've already got a speed hack. I'm not worried about that. So those are position packets, and they seem to appear all over the place, and so it's going to be very important for us to be able to understand them and parse them. It's going to lead to us being able to tell, just from our eyes, where certain items are located, important quest items, for example, but also where our position is, in the world, and so we can judge relative where we are. So I took my character to the gun shop, and I stood on Major Payne's head, and this was the packet that I received right here. And breaking this down here, I think I have it more or less sorted out. So we have the prefix, that's 6D76, that's movement. Then we have the octets here that are the player position, X, Y, Z, and then the camera position for roll, pitch, and yaw. Then we have the trailing bytes for whether or not when not in air. That was mistaken. That's not mistaken. This would be forward, backward, left, and right. And then the last two zeros, I'm not sure. They don't seem to change. It might just be padding. As a matter of fact, that's probably what it is. Though why it would need padding, I don't know. Could be. At 22 bytes. Yeah. No. I'm not sure. I don't know. I haven't gotten that far yet. So these values then, X, Y, and Z, how do we know what their values are? Well, if we take these byte pairs here and we want to convert them, right? We want to see what their values are. There's a couple of options that we have available to us. We can use a calculator to sort of help us out here. So here's a hex calculator. And if I take this here, and I will put that here into the calculator. I know this is small. Just a moment, and I'll hit analyze. And here's the translations that we have available to us. We don't need to worry about the binary. But there's two possibilities for what this value might be. It could be an int, or it could be a float. So I know when Live Overflow did a similar video about dissecting the game protocol, if I remember correctly, when he got his proxy working and he saw the packets being sent, he was able to just look at the way the values were changing as the player was moving around, and he just saw from the behavior of those values changing that It didn't seem to him like they were changing like an integer, so they must be afloat. I'm just not good enough to recognize that. To be perfectly honest with you, if the values are changing, I detect that they have changed, but I couldn't tell you, well, those are changing like an integer. So for my money, what I would do is use this calculator here, or calculate it, of course, myself, within the script or something, to convert that value into as many different types as possible so that I could take a look and make a value judgment based on that. And if I look at this list here, I know that the number is going to have to be something that's relatively manageable, right? So for example, I know it's probably not a big endian float because, look at this value. That's just insanely large and much more large than it needs to be. It would seriously complicate the code to do that. And it would potentially seriously cause some problems depending on what's being done with that number at various different points. Same thing with our these other types here, like the mid-big endian float here. That's just a crazy number to use for something like this. The little endian float here, this negative 37,000 number, you might discount it because it's a negative number, but we're talking about a fairly large 3D environment, and whether whether a value for a position is positive or negative is always going to be relative to the position where it starts. Let me pull up something to explain. Okay, I got my little doodles. I'm ready to explain. So here we have in white is my rough sketch of the island. It's obviously not going to be entirely accurate, but here are the mountains to the south of us. Here is the crap chute. Here is the library and the gun shop, Major Payne. Here we have Balmer Peak in the middle. Here's the Unbearable Woods, the Gold Farm, the ship, Magma Rock, and the bridge, and so on. Right, so we have a road that basically goes all the way around right here. The red dot is our player. Now, relative to a central point is where we're going to find our player position. We can end up with negative values because the center of the intersection, that center point, is going to be 0, 0. It doesn't have to be exactly in the middle of this map. It can be off, but it kind of doesn't matter, right? For the sake of argument, we are on one of these vectors relative to some position, right? So if the center, where that intersection between the x and y axes, and z in this case is completely irrelevant, I'm leaving it out entirely, that would just be up or down, so it doesn't matter here for this demonstration. But relative to those positions and that 0 point where they cross is how we end up with potentially negative numbers in our position value, right? So if I'm in the Unbearable Woods, just for the sake of argument, I don't know if this is the case, but I would be past the center point and high up on the positive side of the x-axis. The x-axis or y-axis in this case could be flipped around. It doesn't matter. It's a completely arbitrary orientation. If I am in the town, however, I'm in the negative side of the x-axis, so my position value will be negative. And the same thing for the y position here. Now, technically, it could be the same for the z position. There's nothing that says that z0 has to be sea level. It can be, but it doesn't have to be, right? After that, we also have our roll, pitch, and yaw, which are 2 bytes each. Roll, pitch, and yaw is a little bit different. It's our camera position. The camera is going to essentially reside within or attached to our player object. Roll, pitch, and yaw is essentially the camera up and down, left and right, and then rotating around the middle axis, clockwise or counterclockwise. Pitch is up and down, yaw, left and right, and then roll is going to be that position. Now, roll I actually did find earlier. I was messing around in Cheat Engine trying to find my location position, and I adjusted a couple of bytes, and then the camera suddenly went cockeyed to the left, like a dog who's curious about what you're saying. Kind of a Dutch angle kind of thing on the camera, and that's because I had altered the roll. In this case, because the camera is always, in our player, is always going to be level with the ground, it's never going to pitch one way or another. It's never going to roll one way or another. Always 0. whereas the pitch and yaw, of course, may change. But that's not always the case. For example, we're going to take a closer look at the spawn package a little bit later on, but notice that the roll, pitch, and yaw are present in that packet as well, but it does have value, and that's because the bare chest is in the middle of the unbearable woods, and it's sitting on what represents the ground, and it's not sitting completely flat, so it is pitched or rolled in one direction or another. All right, so as we saw in that calculator, there were many different values, but there were two standard float values, one of them arriving at our negative number, and the other one at a much larger number. But one of them was big endian and one of them was little endian. The actual position that we see here for X is 286412C7. If we take that number and we convert it directly, we end up with the wrong number, but that's because we tend to read it left to right. That's just our language tradition and what we're used to doing. So when we see the prefix 6D76, and we know that that's movement, and we expect everything else to essentially to be left and right as well. So the context kind of contributes to that desire to read from left to right, which is all well and good, except we have to make sure that we're careful because we're dealing with data streams. And just like when we're debugging, and I mean, if you're in application security, you're going to be working with a lot of debuggers and you're going to see when values are loaded into memory and so on. It really matters, whether or not we're reading it left to right or right to left. So big endian means we're reading it left to right, which means that this value is 286412C7. It's actually loaded little endian, which means we read it right to left. So this value is actually C7126428, not the other way around. And if we do that for the X, Y, and Z, we arrive at all these values. This is where Max Payne is standing, or I should say, where I was standing, where I was standing, I was standing, where I was standing on where Max Payne is standing. So I'm standing on his head. And then we also have the last trailing bytes here with a value of 8, 1, or 7F, depending on if we're moving forward or backward. Those bytes will change. If we're moving left and right, the other bytes will change. So there you have 2 bytes that represent forward or backward, 2 bytes that represent left to right, and 0 in both position indicates we're not moving in either direction. And that's more or less the way the packet is broken down. So now that we know the significance of these different portions, we can actually build or use a dissector. And let's do that. We'll start with Wireshark. So Wireshark is obviously a really powerful tool. And for what we're doing here today, it's a huge shortcut for us, huge shortcut. It essentially, it already is a sniffer. We don't have to worry about sniffing the packets. They're already done by this program. Attach it to your interface and away it goes. Of course, you are probably going to want a filter and so on, as I have here. But that's about it. And then you're off to the races, right? So here is one of those packets. This is one of our movement packets, 6D76. If we highlight it and go to the data stream, now this is the essentially raw stream on this. So it's not a standard part of the protocol stack here. This is data that's appended to it as a payload to be received by the server. So we have to expand the data section, and when we do, here is our packet that we just dissected, 6D76, right? We know that 04CB10C7 corresponds to our X position, but we can't really read that by eye. But since we know how to convert it, we can use a dissector. And Wireshark supports those. You can either write your dissectors in C or you can use LUA. And for this, we're going to use LUA. As a matter of fact, I'm going to provide you with a LUA script that was actually written by Antonin Beaujean, who's another security researcher who I think does workshops or did workshops for Pwn Adventure 3 to demonstrate game hacking. And so he helpfully provided all of his materials on GitHub. And honestly, if you searched for it, like if you searched for Pwn Adventure 3 proxy or anything like that, you'd come across it anyway. So I figure I might as well just make it available to you. And also, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm okay with doing that because, well, number one, seeing what's going on in the game does not get you any closer to hacking it. It just gives you more information to help you figure out what to do. That's number one. And number two, in the past, this particular part of the course has been a major sticking point for students. I had a student who, in summer 2022, spent weeks working on their proxy. I'm not going to have you all do that, but I do recommend that you try to develop your own proxy, or at least write your own sniffer. It's extremely easy. It takes only a couple minutes for a sniffer. I'll show you what I did in a few moments. But if you want to check your work, or if you just want the shortcut, feel free to use the LUA script, as I will demonstrate in just a few moments, and use that intel in order to advance your progress in the course. So let's look at the interpreter, or let's look at the dissector. Let's look at that script. All right, so here we have the LUA script, as you can see, created by Anton and Bojan. I want to make sure that credit goes where it is due. And let's step through this just a little bit. We'll just focus on the movement packet for now. Just know that the other packets are simply handled in a similar fashion, okay? So if we scroll down here, the first thing that we have here is, well, first the definition of fields, but after that we have opcodes. This is basically a handler, and these opcodes correspond to the different prefixes that we see. And we can see that there are plenty of packets identified in this script for the dissector. For example, we can see that there is an update health packet. There is a fire packet, which we actually saw 2A69. There is a fast travel, an event, pickup item. Here's the jump packet, 6A70. There's an update mana. Here's our update location, 6D76, and so on and so forth. So this basically identifies the nature of each packet and allows the script to proceed to the next area, which will determine how it's parsed, because of course all of these packets are different and the values have different significance for different packets each time. We have an identifier for whether or not something is enabled or disabled. We have an identifier for whether or not we're walking or running, which we saw before. In our run packet here. Here is our move section. That's the 7F or 8.1 value that we see at the end of our movement packets right here. Which if we're moving forward or backward, left or right, will change depending on that. Of course, 0 for movement. So here's our moving forward for 7F. Moving backward, we get 8.1. Standing still, we get 0. The other two bytes, or sorry, the other byte, if we are moving left, we get 8.1. If we're moving right, we get 7F. If we're standing still, we get 0. Okay, then after that, because location information is pretty prevalent in many different packets, we have essentially here some sections to parse the particular action based on the opcode to provide a translation of X, Y, and Z coordinates for various different packets, the roll, pitch, and yaw for other packets, and then we have something else we haven't seen yet. Vectors. We haven't talked about vectors, but I'm going to save that for just a couple minutes. Stick with me. We're going to look at a fire packet towards the end of this, and I'll explain what vectors are then. Then we have our move and strafe, as we just saw, mana and health, and, well, so on and so forth. Our gates, here the logic gates. Here we have items are identified by element ID, targets by target ID, quantities, like, for example, if a certain number of pwn coins have been dropped by a mob, we need to know how many that is, so there's a quantity here as well. String, yes. Strings are in the packages. So, for example, when the gun shop owner is instantiated, I broke this apart. So here's the ID for spawn new element. So 6B, and we'll look much closer at the spawn elements later. But for now, know that that's the prefix. The next seems to be the element ID. So the gun shop owner is element 7. This, I don't know. I know that it's different for different objects, but I don't know what it means yet. Same with this. I don't know what that means. But after that, we have some hexadecimal here that spells out in ASCII gun shop owner. So that's a string that identifies what this object is. And then we have his XYZ coordinates, roll, pitch, yaw, and then this, which might be it might be health or something. I don't know what that is either. Inanimate objects have a different value. Oh wait, no, this is a bear. No, this is the bear. I thought this was the bear chest. So the bear chest has 6-4. Gun shop owner has 6-4. The bear has 7D. So the only thing these two have in common is that they are spawned in at the beginning of the game start. And this one is more ad hoc. I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with that. I'm not sure. All right, moving on. Okay, here's our location information, which we'll be using in just a moment. Here's our direction and vectors. All right, and then we begin the actual dissector here. So let's go to the opcode for 6D76. All right, here we go. 6D76. So when that opcode is identified, we come down here. All right. The opcode is trimmed off. It's done its work. We don't need it anymore. It doesn't hold any significance in terms of interpreting any data. It got us to this point. So we don't need to worry about that. Then after that, so we set our offset from the end of our opcode. After that, we go from that offset plus 12 bytes. That's our X, Y, and Z coordinates. And that sets our offset there. Then from that point, we grab 6 more bytes. That's our pitch, roll, and yaw. After that, we grab 1 more byte. That's our move, the pair there. Then we grab another byte. That's our strafe. And that's it for the move packet. The other ones will do something similar, but of course they're interpreted in different ways because they contain different information. They're all different lengths, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that this, I mean, here's the movement packet for using Great Balls of Fire, but this information is significant for something, but we don't know what because we haven't interpreted yet. That's what it does, right? It dissects the packets and shows us what's going on. So let's take this and let's put it in Wireshark and do some dissection and see what we get back. So here in Wireshark, of course, I've got my data stream here. This is just the info. I have the source and destination hidden because I don't want to broadcast that. But I do have the info tab here, so you can see that if it's 3021, that's our server. 7529, that's the local port. So if you see something that's from 3021 to the local port, that's server to client, and 7529 to 3021, that's client to server, just so you know what you're looking at. And we need to add the LUA script as a plugin. So if you go up to Help and About Wireshark, then go to the Folders tab, it will show you where the personal plugins folder is, or sorry, personal Lua plugins folder here. I'm going to go to that location. I'm going to copy the script into that location, and then we'll move on. Okay, Lua script is in that location at Wireshark plugins, and we don't have to restart Wireshark. If we hold Control, hold Shift, and press L, it will automatically reload your plugins, and when we do, our view changes. The data column is there, but it's now blank. That's because this is the same packet that we just had highlighted. The data stream is gone. It's been converted. The dissector has interpreted it, and now it's known as Pwn Adventure 3 Game Server Protocol. So I'm going to get rid of the data column. We don't need that anymore. Let's expand the Game Server Protocol and see what we got. So it did identify the correct type. This is an update location package. That's the action that we got. So our prefix 6D76 equals update location. I'm going to move to the bottom. We were not strafing, so we have a neutral result. We were not moving when this packet was captured, so we have a neutral result. Our direction shows us the roll, pitch, and yaw, as we saw. Except there's a mistake. So, yeah. I was correct. I had to do a sanity check because I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong here. But yes, the pitch, roll, pitch, and yaw corresponds to an orientation in space. It's not a direction or a position. It is an orientation in space. So X, Y, and Z provides your position. Roll, pitch, and yaw provides orientation. Where are you looking, right? So yes, pitch is orienting up and down. Yaw is orienting left and right. And roll is indeed rotating along that central axis. So there is a mistake. Apparently, Anton Bajon made a little bit of an error. I was not cockeyed. I was not severely off center, a major Dutch angle, when this packet was recorded. So I'm guessing that roll is pitch and pitch is roll. So just keep that in mind if you need it. Although, to be honest with you, I don't think it would ever come up. We're not making any adjustments, or we don't really care about those values. So okay, let's now get to the main event here. Let's look at location. So indeed, it has dissected the X, Y, and Z coordinates, and we do see here where I was standing when this was recorded. Now, this is the kind of information I would really like to get in an active stream so that I can see in real time where I'm standing in the game. That would be useful if I know the location of something and I want to find it. I'll be able to use those positions, or I'll be able to use my position to check and see whether I'm moving in the right direction or whether or not I'm close or far, or anything like that. So we can easily do that. In the case of Wireshark, since we have these available to us, I'm first going to add a column that shows the action, because I want to know what each packet is. I want to be able to easily identify by sight which packets are which. So if we right-click that, we can actually go to Apply as a Column, and it adds it for us. We now have an Update Location column, and I'm going to actually move that a little bit off to the side here, because I don't need all of this info, but I would still like to be able to display the ports for you so you can see what direction things are traveling. So that'll do just fine. We can do the same thing with our X coordinate. Right-click, Apply as a Column, and we have it. Our Y coordinate, right-click, Apply as a Column. Add our Z coordinate, right-click, Apply as a Column, and there we have it. We have all three of our vectors up. We can see what's going on. Oh, sorry, not vectors. We have all three of our position locations up, and we would be able to see this. Scrolling back here, it doesn't look like I was moving at the time, but soon enough we'll have an opportunity to see this at play. But I have mentioned vectors a couple times, and I said that I would show you what that is. So let's actually okay. So let's take a look and see what we got here. Well, first of all, I'm at an area in our capture here where I fired off some shots. We can see that there's actually update mana packets. So the server is indeed keeping track of our health and mana, because this is coming from the server to the client. So the server is telling the client it's time to update your mana to, in this case, 96. Here's me. So from 95, then 96. This might be useful to us, because if we can find the fire packet and the fire packet contains the amount of mana that's used, then we can maybe manipulate that packet and set it to 0 so that at least we're not using mana when we fire something. Although something tells me that's not going to be the case for this game. So let's see here. We're looking for there we go. Here's a fire packet. All right, so the fire packet, fire weapon, great balls of fire, action fire, string, great balls of fire. Okay, so it identifies that back at the side. And instead of an XYZ position, we have vector X, vector Y, and vector Z. And then after that, we have an update location. So that's actually bad news for our free mana hack. It means that the server knows how much mana a great ball of fire uses and will send an update and for that amount. So when it spawns, let's see. Yeah, it's just update mana, and then it gives the value. So there's very little opportunity here for malfeasance. Okay, but what is vector X, Y, and Z? It's X, Y, and Z, but it's not really a position, nor is it an orientation. Let's go back to my paint here. So in orange is what we're talking about now. In orange, here we have our camera, and that has a pitch, roll, and yaw, and an X, Y, and Z value, giving us the position and the orientation. That orientation happens to be in line with a bear. The bear is an enemy, and it's going to attack us. So we want to shoot it. In video games, the bullet does not come out of the barrel of the gun. The barrel of the gun, if there is one present, is just an image overlay that gives the impression that we're holding on to the weapon. The bullet or projectile in these cases will come out of somewhere within the player object or from the player object, typically speaking within the camera view, either directly in the center or close to it, or unless there's some fancy chicanery going on, perhaps it may move along two different vectors and move towards the center of the screen. In any event, it's an object that's spawned that comes out of the camera, not the gun, basically. But it can't just be instantiated. It has to have motion. And so that's what the vector, the X, Y, and Z vector are. It's not a position. It is a velocity and it is a trajectory, right? So it comes out of the camera. It has an X, Y, and Z value for the trajectory because as the fireball here in the upper left-hand corner is flying through 3D space, it's going to be moving through 3D space along the X, Y, and Z axis. And chances are it's going to be moving a little bit in every direction. The vector just determines in what way it moves through 3D space. That's really all it does. So that's what vectors are. It just determines from the position where it is spawned to the location what is the path that it is traveling. Okay, so that's vectors. I think we are just about ready to run this thing live here and see if we can track our location in Pwn Adventure 3. But before we do, let me hop over to the sniffer that I ran and show you what I did with my own. So there are many wonderful and very smart, talented, but much better than me, people that have come before me here in Pwn Adventure 3. Live Overflow did a series on it where he wrote his own proxy. Antoine Beaujean, as we already talked about, has written his own. Jay Minton, I found his walkthrough earlier this year and also wrote a proxy. All of them did great and are much better at this than I am. But I really wanted to do my own. And what I wanted to start with is doing my own sniffer and dissector, which I hope will eventually lead me to creating my own proxy where I can inject my own packets. I've taken some inspiration from all of the people that I've mentioned, and so we begin in our main function where this is really simple. Creating a sniffer and a dissector took me literally minutes using the package I'm about to show you. But all it does in the main function is starts a thread that begins the sniffer. Everything you see here is just going to be what I use in the future when I want to run certain commands, right? So it will sit here at a prompt waiting for input. If I quit, then it breaks. But if I type something out, then it will inject a package. But I'm not there yet. I'm not quite that far. I just have the sniffer and dissector ready to go. So we're going to ignore that, and we'll come back to it when I get to that video. So what it does is it starts game sniff. So here we are. Here's game sniff. All it does, I'm using a Python package called Scapy, which is an excellent package for grabbing, interpreting, and manipulating, sending network packets. It has made things so easy. So I use that to sniff, and I've filtered down to only packets coming to or from the game server. Those are the only ones I'm interested in. I've decided to grab them one at a time. I check to see if there is a data stream. As we saw in Wireshark, the data package, the actual protocol, is non-standard, and so it comes in the raw form. Technically, it is the load value in the raw section. So I put that into a variable, and I just switch that over to hex. So it's normally in bytes. I switch it to hex so that I can read the 6D76 string. Then I take that and I parse it out, just like the LUA script does. So if it is a movement package, then clear the current value. I don't have this update very often. I have it update every quarter second. because I'm old and slow and my brain is mush, and I really don't want it changing very fast because I won't be able to see what it says. So I have it updating on a fairly slow basis. So if it is, clear out the current console, print out the full string so that I can see it, and then basically grab the relevant bytes for the X, Y, and Z axis, use struct to unpack them. The less than F demonstrates that I want it to be a float, and the less than, it's little endian, so it interprets it correctly. And then print that out. So movement and then the X, Y, and Z vectors. And that's it. It took 5 minutes to write this. I've been working way harder on figuring out how Scapy can be used to craft packets and send them than it did to write a sniffer. Super easy. And as a dissector, all I need to do is essentially either do a handler or do different if statements for different packages. I'll probably just do different if statements. This is not the most elegant implementation here. I'm not a programmer. I threw this shit together based on a wing, a prayer, some documentation, and relying on other people who were willing to ask questions and get answers. So that's all this is. But both of these things will do roughly the same thing. The sniffer and dissector that I wrote does the same thing. The LUA script is already packaged for you, so you don't have to write your own. But I do encourage you to at least give it a shot. It's worth learning to do. Writing a sniffer is not something that you have to do very often, but it's an interesting exercise, and it's not nothing. All right, so I am already in the game. Here I am. I'm standing in the gun shop above Major Payne. Right, so here I am. Here's Major Payne down here. All right, I'm going to pause it, which is fine because the game will actually continue to send movement packets even when it's paused. So, all right, let's go to Wireshark, and I'm going to move this off to the side, and I am going to go ahead and start it. All right, and we can see we are getting movement packages, and we are getting our X, Y, and Z coordinates. They're not changing because I'm not moving. I'm also going to start my own sniffer. And there we go. So you can see here's mine. I did not want it to scroll because it's hard for me to see. Like I said, I'm old and slow. My brain is mush. So I wanted a more static value just to sit here for me. And I don't have it updating nearly as often. I don't really need it to. So let me move the client off to the side here so you can see. And if I move just the camera, none of those values change because none of them represent our roll, pitch, and yaw. It's just X, Y, and Z. So I will need to move here. So if I do, you can see the values are changing and they're updating as we walk. There's nothing wrong with just using Wireshark. I can see those values and get a good enough idea of where I am. But in mine, I was able to basically have the output be exactly what I wanted it to do. It's updating fairly infrequently, but it's definitely accurate enough. I can tell where I'm at, and it's static, so it's just much easier for me to see. Let's see how accurate they are. Let's go stand on Major Payne's head. I'm not going to be exactly where I was standing before, but I'll pause this. Let's check our notes. Okay, so here we have Major Payne's location right here. I calculated this to be negative 37,476.2, negative 37,472.6. That's close. That's within. I don't know what a single digit is relative to the distance, but that seems an insignificant amount. On mine, negative 73472.6, so it's exactly what Wireshark says, and it's same as the thing here, close enough. I calculated negative 18084.5, negative 18087.2, so we're still off a hair, but both Wireshark and my script agree. I have more significant digits than Wireshark does, but I could change that. That's the beauty of, rolling your own. You can have the output how you want it. You can update it as much as you want it. You can do whatever you want, right? Z 2685, 2684.79, 26. Yep. So they all agree. They seem to all be accurate, which is wonderful. So, it seems as if we have a beginning success here. This is really difficult. The game client's spanning 2 monitors right now, so I'm only looking at about half of it. The crosshairs are off to the side, and it's really messing with my brain. Anyway, so that is sniffing and dissecting. The LUA script will be available on Canvas, or you can search for Anton Bajon's GitHub and get it yourself straight from the horse's mouth. Feel free to use it. Again, I do encourage you to do your own. I always encourage students to try and write your own. At least give it a shot. Try to write your own. But as I mentioned before, I know that this is a major point of frustration in this course, so I want to smooth the bumps as much as possible. And I think that that using the script and getting the concept is probably the most important thing in this case. But I am going to continue in my pursuit of writing my own TCP proxy, and when I do, I will make a video about it, so that if you are working on your own, then you have something else to go towards. That said, however, our next step in terms of game objectives is now to use these values that we're able to see now and translate them to the game, because these values, my X, Y, and Z position, exist in the game. If I can change them, then I can teleport. So the next video will be me looking for these values using Cheat Engine, adding a teleport hack to our trainer. So make sure you watch that one, because you're going to find that a very useful skill in completing many of the challenges for this game. All right. Until then, take care. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time, etc., etc. Goodbye.